What's the difference between being self-employed and a business owner? That's going to be the topic of today's video. Okay everyone, if you're an expat or a high net wealth individual in particular, go over to adamfire.com and see how I can help you. Now on this video, I'm going to talk about the differences between being, for example, self-employed or a sole proprietor and a business owner. Does it make a big difference? Now, obviously when you're a salaried employee and you become self-employed, that's a big change. Often you're taking more risk. But a lot of people say, well, being a business owner, is it so much different to being self-employed? And I would say it's very different. I've been a salaried employee, I've been self-employed, and I run my own businesses. And there's actually quite a big difference between all three. So if we just compare running your own business to, say, being a sole proprietor or self-employed, I think the differences are, number one, you've got more risk. Because say, for example, if you're a plumber or an electrician or whatever, and you become a sole proprietor, essentially what you're doing is, yes, you're making more money from your customers than you would as a salaried employee in return for taking more risk. And yes, you might have to worry about a few more things like how to invoice or whatever, but there are fewer moving parts. That's one thing. In addition to that, I think you can switch off. That's a second big difference. For example, if you're a self-employed worker, even though you might think about work more than if you're salaried, most self-employed people I know can go away for 1 week, 2 weeks even. And yes, they're not going to get paid for that 2 weeks, but they can switch off. I personally know some people, especially some tradespeople, who they overall make more money than they did when they were salaried, but they'll take 1 or 2 weeks off a year and they don't really think about work during that period of time. They can kind of switch off. And the same in the evenings and the weekends. But I would say the big difference, if you start your own business, start hiring people and so on, it almost becomes like your own baby almost, in terms of it becomes your life. You think about it, you subconsciously think about it, you might even dream about it. Even if you do go away on holiday, you know, you're thinking about it a bit. You might take fewer real holidays. So for example, the last time I took what I would call a real holiday, in other words, something which lasted about a week with pretty much no work, was back in 2018. So I think that's a big difference. Whereas when I was self-employed, and certainly when I was a salaried employee, I could go away, I could do things like a switch off more often. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have more stress as a company owner. It could be a good or a bad stress. Because obviously if somebody's passionate about their work, it could actually be a good kind of pressure or stress. And also, I think finally, ironically, and I think this is something which is wrong, I think if you run your own business and succeed, there's a lot more social status, or people who think it's a good thing that you're an entrepreneur. So in the 1980s and 1970s, I believe, very few people thought it was kind of something to aspire to be an entrepreneur. People wanted to work at IBM or Microsoft. Well, Microsoft would have been in the 90s, but you know what I mean, big companies and so on. That started to change, and people now look up to entrepreneurs, even entrepreneurs who fail, which is a good thing. However, often self-employed people aren't respected in the same way, which is a pity, but it's something I've noticed a lot compared to when I talked to people when I was self-employed. I think people respect business owners more. In many ways it's wrong, because a self-employed person is also taking a lot of risk. Yes, probably less risk and less responsibility if they're just a sole proprietor, but they're still taking quite a lot of risk. How can I help you? In two ways. First of all, are you an expat, a high net wealth individual, or just somebody who lives in a part of the world where it's difficult to get access to quality investment solutions? In which case, go onto my website on adamfire.com and find out more. If you don't fit into any of those categories, then in which case there's a range of free material on my website, on this YouTube channel, and indeed on my Quora, where I get over 200 or have received over 231 million views in the last few years. And finally, if you want to actually read my thoughts in more detail, go onto Amazon and find my book on there.